All right, well then I'll introduce Roy to the group. He's a therapist, he's also a writer, and he works in the palliative care unit as the bereavement coordinator. And I know some of you have met him through his work, and the rest of us are really looking forward to hearing what you have to say this evening to our group, Roy, and thank you for coming.
Well, thanks for being here. Well, we're going to need to start by going around and hearing who you are and why you're here tonight, and if there's anything specifically that you're curious about or that you're kind of interested in. Why don't we start on my right and zip that way?
I think the third year was the second and a half and third year was actually tougher than the first. This group has been tremendous for us. I guess we've gotten to heal through the process by being involved in the group, co-facilitating, and so it's really been I guess you get sometimes by giving, so it's really been a great experience for us. And when Krista first got diagnosed with pancreatic, we tried to find out a lot about it, and Craig's Cause was the one website in North America that held all the information. We were on there actually for 2 weeks getting the information before we figured out it was actually in Halifax. We didn't get that, so it's really what Stephanie has done and what this whole organization has done is quite fantastic. And the fact that we're doing groundbreaking research here in Halifax, I think is it's certainly encouraging. Long road ahead.
Thank you. And I'm Roy. My interests are people in difficult places. That's what I like to think about and read about and talk about, and I've worked with people in a lot of different tough places. When I first started this work, I worked at a children's hospital, and then I worked with people with HIV and AIDS for 4 years, when just at the sort of end of the 90s when that was tapering off, and did a lot of learning there around complex grief and communities in crisis. And then moved into mental health for 8 years. I did 8 years of acute care mental health work and outpatient work. So I saw all the depression, anxiety, sorrow, borderline personality disorders, schizophrenia, all those very real and very very heartbreaking human experiences for families and for the person who's experiencing it. And then recently have moved into sort of the queen mother of all losses, which is death, and it's been a really, it sort of has in some ways it's rounding out my understanding, kind of deepening my understanding of loss and the human experience of it. All of us have experienced loss. I've experienced loss, and you don't have to have someone die to experience loss. But one of my dear friends was hit by a drunk driver. My best friend actually was hit by a drunk driver about 6-7 years ago now, and that was quite a profound moment for me, which I've done a really good job of sort of pretending like he's just still in Ottawa. As he was living in Ottawa, he left Halifax for Ottawa and got hit by a car in Ottawa. I was like, well, let's leave him in Ottawa. I'm just going to leave Ben in Ottawa. So he's still in Ottawa. I know he's dead, but I much prefer thinking of him walking his dog in Ottawa. So I'm here today to discuss grief with you, and there's a couple of ways we can approach that. One is I'd like to answer questions that people have. If you have questions about grief, about your grief, about grief in general, about what you're experiencing, if you're worried about anything, if you have wake up in the night kind of wondering if is this going to end, or am I going to be okay, or what's wrong with me? Is there something particularly wrong with me that I'm experiencing my grief this way? Do other people experience this way? So I'm open to any of those kind of questions. But I can also answer more clinical, quote-unquote, questions around grief and around the experience of grief and the ways in which human beings grieve. And I can also talk about cultural issues around grief and how our culture and churches and societies approach grief. So those are sort of the three areas, the more experiential, the sort of clinical questions, and then more of the sort of sociological stuff. So I'm just going to throw it open. Who might?
Well, my husband was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so I left my job and tended him for 3 years at home, and that was a grieving process.
And how did you identify that? How did you know that was a grieving process? What were the signs for you?
Well, I just realized that nothing was ever going to be the same. Everything that was no longer is. And every day, every moment, it's if the previous moment never happened. So all that we had, all that we shared, it's gone. Even though the closeness seemed to be still there, more so from me than him, maybe, I don't know. But I slowly watched things die.
One of the things that I think is interesting about what you said that really jumped out at me was you said that everything we had and everything we'd done was gone. And yet when we're not in a place of grief, that also is, nothing changes. Everything that we do and everything we've done is gone. It's not like it's with us. So there is something that happens to us existentially. There's something that happens to our emotional world when death enters into it, where the things that we normally just go, well, this is life, we're in the middle of it. All of a sudden, that's put into stark contrast in a way that things that were there, like nothing changed except your husband was not going to be there. Sorry, is that who you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
The big circle of life, really,
It really
really minimizing yourself.
And it made living in the moment.
Yeah.
You know how you say we should all live in the moment? We shouldn't live, what happened. We shouldn't live for what's going to happen. We should live in the moment. Well, y'all say you live in the moment, but Alzheimer's brings living in the moment to a whole new level, and you're absolutely right. I didn't try to make him remember. I didn't try to make him change. There's this amazing book that I read that was a tremendous help. But
What was it called?
Contented Dementia. I probably should get royalties. I've recommended it. I've actually given it to.
Contented Dementia.
It's by Patterson, I think. But it's just a way in dealing with Alzheimer's that was a tremendous help to me. But you're absolutely right. You just have to let them take the lead and just do whatever. But it is, once I realized that this is my future, then it freed me to live in the present. I don't know if you understand that, but that's how I came to.
Yeah. You let go of.
Still didn't make it
your
any easier on a daily
expectations.
basis, but it did.
Yeah.
It did. It does. Yeah.
I found it
Yeah.
a sense of freedom in the sense that you could attend to the physical needs,
Yeah.
but you sort of enter their space, let them
Yeah.
take control.
Because it is
My
about
mom-
them.
Great. So this is why I let other people answer my questions, because that's that's pretty much it. That experience of struggling, both at the level of encountering our limitations, are really encountering the true, it's almost an existential religious encounter with limitations, control, being present, right? Like that almost Buddhist idea of you've only got this breath, this moment, this hour, and that anything else, the worry that begins to mount outside the moment, is just more suffering. And people recognize that they get, as you say, you get stuck. People who, if you're already an anxious person, that's going to inflate, right? If you're a little OCD, that's going to inflate a little bit. I know I'm saying those things. I mean, if you're a worrier, you're going to worry more. If you tend to be sad and melancholy, you're going to be more sad and melancholy. If you're a controller, you're going to be a bit more of a control freak. If you tend to protect everyone around you, you're going to do that more. Or if you're a caregiver, if you're an obsessive, well, I shouldn't say obsessive, let's say compulsive. A compulsive caregiver. Because I think most good caregivers, helpers, people in the helping profession like myself, and probably a lot of you folks, helpers tend to help more and get a little bit Nazi about it, right? Like, I will help, no matter what. So that experience, the experience of, but then beneath all that, there's the pain, and the experience of death is that experience of letting everything go. I mean, it truly is. The person who's dying has to let go of everything. Everything. Except maybe their faith. Right? If you have a faith. But not everyone has that. So a person, they can hang on to their faith in God and their hope for their eternal life. But pretty much everything else on this plane, they got to let go of. And that's an incredible work. It's an incredible human work. It's our last big human job, is to let go of everything that you've accumulated, everything you ever loved and grasped and held to and held precious. You have to let it go, including the people you love. So bizarre. Who would ever think that we would have to let go of those things? Unthinkable. And the process for families and for the person who's dying is going through that impossible moment between when we have to say goodbye, when we have to literally say we're at an end until that moment comes. And finding our way gracefully and humanly, but not perfectly, because that would be a big mistake, to try and think that there's some proper way to do this. Kind of comes back to Eileen's statement. I love your statements, Eileen. I always do when you're like I'm not learning this very well, right? It's, you've been saying that since I first met you, right? Like as if there's a something that we can learn, and then once we got it, and then we're gonna get it.
There's no book.
Yeah, no, there's just us. There's us and them, and then there's all of our feelings and all our thoughts, and something about being present, and something about letting go and letting be. That's something to do with anticipatory, but then it continues on after death too. That same process, those skills that you learn, those letting go skills. Hang in there, over there, I don't want to lose you. The same skills and that same process continues, but of course it's a whole new game, because now there's just a whole bunch of new things that we're grappling with, deeper in a way, because the person's gone. Like they're literally, as you said so succinctly, they're not there to share anymore. What a perfectly beautiful and simple way of saying what it is all about. We no longer can share with that person, physically, emotionally, sexually, ideologically. It's no more sharing, no more walking together. So I don't mean to mean. I take that back. People have very profound experiences of other people. I didn't mean to say that's not possible. Yeah.
And I don't think that's unnatural. I'm not hanging on, it's
What if you were hanging on?
Yes, what if I was?
What if you were?
Yeah.
If you were.
You guys,
hang on. Whatever.
Yeah.
What if somebody in Italy, you're supposed to hang on until they die? Till you die. You put the black clothes on, and you go through the town square until the day you die, thinking about Joe and poor Pasquale or whatever. I mean, there's no rules to this. If you love so deeply that you want to carry that person with you and hang on tight, I don't think there's anyone who can say that there's anything wrong with that. It's your friends will. Your friends will tell you that you're,
A drag.
They'll say all kinds of things, and you won't fit into your culture.
Oh, she's not dealing very well.
Oh, for sure. Look, they're going to say you're not dealing well even when you're dealing great.
Yeah.
Write a book of all the things that people should not be saying to people who are grieving.
Right. Well, and that's a really interesting point, and there's two sides to that. The one side is that it's true that it's such an anxiety provoking experience, whether it's family or friends or acquaintances or work, that it's very difficult for people to say the right thing. It's just, you know, I'm a bereavement counselor, and one time I went to a funeral of a woman who had lost their dad on the palliative care unit. Knew the family well, spent a lot of good time with them, and went to the funeral, did the funeral. At the reception, I sort of got in line, and I walked up to the young girl. She was probably like 22, 23, really struggling in her grief. And, you know, I was her grief counselor, and literally in that moment, like just seeing the shattered look on her face, I said, "Can I get you a sandwich?" That's what I said to her. "Can I get you a sandwich?" I know, right. And I was just like, immediately I was just like, wow. So, you know, we don't know what to say, and that's in our genes. That's because death screws us up, because like there's a part of us, and we have to also understand this, that is a bit repulsed by death, and because we're life creatures. Like our job is to stay alive. So when we get around, that's why the smell of death and carrion and why some people are repulsed by the dead body and other people don't want to see. Like there's a little bit of this natural inborn repulsion at death, which is natural. There's nothing wrong with that, because we're creatures of life. So part of that is really healthy, and we need to understand that, you know, that anxiety is normal. But the other thing is, the other experience I've heard is that it doesn't matter. When you're grieving, it's like, it doesn't matter what you say, it's wrong, right? Like you can say even the right thing, but I'm just not in the mood to hear anything because I'm just grieving. And nothing you can say, I don't care how hard you try to love me and care for me right now, I'm a cactus. I'm a cactus of sorrow. And you feel like a cactus. And the world feels like a cactus. It's a desert environment. Grief is a desert environment where everything is so desperate that it's got all its barbs out. That's how it feels. Like it's not a place to walk barefoot, right? So that's why families have such difficulty can have such difficulty, because everyone is just like, just enough water, just enough soil, just to barely survive, keep your barbs out, right? And that's exactly what a desert is, right? It's this deadly creatures everywhere. Every creature will kill you in the desert. Every tree will hurt you. The rocks will hurt you. The sun will hurt you. It's not a place you can live long. So you got to deal with that. And that's kind of how it is during grief. So there's two sides of that, you know. And but we get very caught up, I think, and a lot of the work I do with people is helping them to really be graceful and gracious with themselves during that period of sorrow when the world doesn't feel hospitable, right? I also sometimes I call it a refugee camp. My grief groups feel like refugee camps of people who no longer belong in the world, who don't feel like they belong in the world, who only feel like they belong with other refugees. It's the only people they feel comfortable with.
Because they can't get over it?
Because they're all walking down the same lonely road in a world. They're homeless. Whatever's behind them is just got nuked. Whatever's behind them is in flames. And there's another land they have to go to that's not theirs, and they don't want to go there, and they're going there reluctantly. So they put some tents up somewhere and hang out for a while and grieve, because they don't want to go there, and they can't go there. And I think one of the things that is so profound about grief is that it can be so much harder than we thought it was going to be. Like we talk about grief, we think, cry, all those things will be tough, and I'll kind of get through, and I'll get back on the horse, and all those kind of cliche things. And then grief comes. Then grief comes. And it's nothing like that. And this is not true for everyone. For some people, it's doable, if you know what I mean. Like some people, it's not quite as devastating. For some it is, for all kinds of different reasons. And it's those people that that Shakespeare was talking to when he said he was saying man. He said any man can handle grief except he who is in it, right? It's so easy to sit outside and go, grief, yeah. until you're in it, and then it is a horse of a different color. So the people who I tend to work with are the people who are experiencing a more profound experience. Otherwise, you usually don't come and talk to a guy like me, or go see a doctor, or go see a psychologist, or whatnot. So, but the true that experience of grief, that hollow, heart kind of deadening, affect squelching, anxiety producing, sleep killing, marriage destroying, right? Or taxing, right? That is not an easy horse to ride. That's a wild stallion that is like, where is it going next, right? Running the bulls of your own life, running with the bulls. So I really don't think there's any easy way out, except to know that what you're experiencing is normal and natural. Does it surprise you then? I mean, if you think about the person who's been habitually the strong one, holding, right? How long were you holding? Not just with this, but I mean, as that strong person. What's your age?
I'm 40.
You're 40. Yeah. So there's a perfect thing that happens to helpers in the middle of life, straddling our youth and our mortality. Helpers get caught in this place because they actually find themselves holding up families on one side, the youth, the young, the children, and on the other side, they're caring for parents and death. People are dying, and caregivers. It creates incredible fatigue for people that are helpers. That doesn't happen when you're younger and doesn't happen when you're older, but it really happens to middle-aged caregivers, whether it's nurses, doctors, family members. It's a really, really dangerous time. But if you think about it, all that holding and all that supporting and all that being strong has to give, because it's bogus. It's really, no one is that strong, and no one can be strong forever. No one can hold up everything, nor should we. So what ends up happening is this huge sort of reflex, where you go from being all that to all that, right? And it's profound. It's just as profound, as strong as you were, as freaking on top, and as far as everyone else was concerned, man, you see like Iron Woman and Shield, and everything came off you, and I'm always going the extra mile. All that stuff, just put it in negative. And you can't give, and you can't love, and you can't be there, and you can't do it right, because we have to have that. There is a breathing. There's the in and there's the out in life, and the learning of that. So one of the things that I would encourage you, but as opposed to saying like you're really, like you're screwed for life. This is, as opposed to saying like this is truly the exhalation of everything that you built in being a strong person. There's nothing wrong with being strong. The world needs strong people. But great is the crash thereof, right? So there's a wisdom, there's a huge wisdom, and there's a deep spiritual lesson, and I think that comes through going through these places of desolation, going through these places where you no longer can help, where you actually have to face the fact that you can be vulnerable, that you need help, that you need to be a child sometimes, that you need to be weak and unable to, because you are, not because, but because we actually are as human beings. Like, this is one half of our humanity, is this just incredible vulnerability. And I'm one of those people like you who spends a lot of time in environments like this being strong, right? And it's very easy for me to find myself on the other side of that, right? Because there is always that breathing going on. But sometimes it happens on a scale that is overwhelming and sometimes epic. It feels epic inside, right? Like, what has happened to me? Like, I'm not the same person. It feels like you've just entered a novel and there's no getting out. It really does feel like a black hole, right? So I would encourage you to think about what you're going through as an opportunity, as a really necessary time for you to really grow and learn about the importance of you being helped what it means for you just to accept help, to be helped, to not be the caregiver, to not be the best mom. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, you can still be a wonderful, amazing person and deserve love. Right? To deserve love and to deserve care, not because of what we do, not because we're so good at doing, which is what helpers do. We only see our value out of what we do. And then we're thrust into this place where we have to love ourselves just because we are. Just because you are. With all your weakness, with all your sadness, with all your lack of affect, in all the ways you suck right now. Yeah, I know you do. I really believe it. I believe you when you say it. But I also think that the thing for you to do, if you can see that if you can love yourself here, that you're free. Right? Because if you can't love yourself here, if you're only good, and if you're only lovable, and if we're only, good people when we're there, then you're always going to have to come back here. That your body will keep bringing you back for this lesson. So, there's really something beautiful to be gained, but it's very costly. But if you come out on the other side, you might cut yourself a bit more slack next time, right? And what a treat that would be for you. And for all of us who are super caregivers, to learn. And it kind of comes back to these early statements that we heard about, kind of letting go a bit and the addiction that we have to control. Grief really messes with that. Our addiction to control, our addiction to help, our addiction to doing the right thing.
And before I forget this thought, because I'm the same type as you are, and...
What is that type?
Well, person that the family goes to.
Okay, right.
The caregiver. My dad, I lost 2 sisters and my father within 5 years. I was the main caregiver. I couldn't be need help because I had to help everybody else. Gosh, I'm going to need help. And
good for you.
In order for me to be helped, I'm going to have to let myself be vulnerable, which is something I am not comfortable with because that's weak, right?
Weak.
And I had to, but like I said, you have to let yourself be vulnerable, and that's not part of our makeup.
No, it's not part of our cultural makeup either, right? To allow ourselves.
Exactly, yeah.
There's a huge taboo against being vulnerable and being
Especially in the
weak.
workplace.
Oh, yeah.
Well, for sure, that's right. But I think it goes right across into families. In fact, people hear it more often from families than they do from, in the work environment. One of the things I hear often, and I don't mean to say that you're wrong, I just want to offer some of the things I've heard, is that, they go back to work and it's the one place where they can almost be normalized. It's the one place where they can just go and do the frickin' job, and it's the same as it was before.
Yeah.
And if I don't talk about X, it's almost the same.
Everybody around you, tippy toes.
Yeah, but as long as people just act, just act, just pretend that things are the same. But actually, in a lot of work environments, it actually is quite a lot the same, and it's a huge breath of relief for people because it's the one island in their life where things seem to not have changed. Whereas family is not like that. Whereas friends is not like that. Whereas the church is not like that. Everyone knows, and everyone is always reminding you, and you're being reminded that it's not the same anymore. And to add to that, and then we'll invite some more questions, is that one of the other important things about grief that I think is really not very well understood is that the grief causes change in our identity. Right? Like when you said, I feel like something has died inside, that's exactly right. Something has died inside. It comes back to this idea that we can't share anymore. And that literally, this is something I learned with the people with HIV and AIDS, and that in their community, when a whole community died, when your coffee seller died and your best friend died, and your buddies, when they all died, how did you identify yourself anymore? Just imagine if the top 5 people in your life, the 5 most important people in your life died within 2 years. Who would you be then? right? Just imagine the identity crisis that you'd have, right? Profound. But it's the same thing when we lose a partner, especially spouses. I think spouses are particularly difficult because, your kids, you got no choice. Your parents, you got no choice. Spouses, we choose, right? And therefore, there's this huge degree of assent, of offering, there's a huge degree of identification with them in a way that's not genetic. It's as of choice, it's of love, it's of decision. And in that decision, in that joining together, our identities change, their identities change, and we become this other thing. And when they're gone, we're not the same person anymore. And one of the profound experiences that I hear of people who come to me, who are especially hurting, is that feeling that I'm not me anymore. That I'm not me anymore. And so I take very seriously the idea that that's not just because things have changed. Like he's not around the house. I have to cut the grass. It's at the deeper level. It's really about I can't be me without him. I can't be me. The me I know can't exist without him. So that means this is dead too. Now there's still parts of me inside that, there's relics, there's fragments, we had life before our spouses. But sometimes that stuff gets pretty remote. And it feels like we're starting fresh, and in some ways we are. And if you can embrace that, obviously it's hugely painful, but there is an embracing of that new identity as opposed to struggling to get back to, people talk about the new normal, and I understand what they're saying, but I really detest that in a way because there's nothing normal about it. It's the new abnormal. It's the new uncomfortable, awkward, vulnerable me without this incredible force that used to hold me and keep me and nourish me. Even if it was tension-filled, even if it wasn't, all smiles and juggles. Okay, any more questions? Any more thoughts and questions? We're doing great. We're doing great. Is this the kind of dialogue that, is this good? I don't know if this is, I don't know if you're going to post this on your website.
No, you just nicely explained why I started.
Any other questions, thoughts, or just, observations or anything that...
Where do you start? That's my challenge, is that I feel I'm at the bottom of the pit and I have no rope and I need to figure out how to get up. And I don't even know where to start.
Cool.
Whereas if somebody said, I got a pancreatic cancer diagnosis, I'd be like, here's where you go.
Right on. Great question. Where do you start? You're at the bottom. Okay, so I actually want to answer this question. I would really like to answer this question, but I really want your input and thoughts as I answer this question, because this is a question that I've put a lot of thought into and I've had a lot of dialogue with people about. And I wish I had a chart here. I wish I had one of those flip charts in here. I'd use that with you. But the idea, the question of where do I start? I'm in the pit, and I need a way out.
Do you want a flip chart?
It's okay. It's totally good. We'll just roll. The idea that we're in a pit is a very, it's a metaphor. It's a powerful metaphor, and it's not a bad one. But it has some inherent difficulties with it, right? If we fall into a pit, like literally, if you're walking along and you fall into a pit, you need to get out, right? We need to get out of the pit. And you probably hurt yourself falling in the pit. Or if you didn't, you feel like you can't get out. And usually the idea is that you can't just it's not just like you just, all scrabble up at the top. This is not a pit. This is you spelunked into the Lewis and Clark caverns and it's dark and you don't know where you're out and you're in the middle of it. So it's a labyrinth more than a pit. And the metaphor is tricky when we talk about it because what we tend to want to do is we want to apply to this metaphor, and I'll really bring this back to really lived experience in a second, but just stay with me for a minute as I talk about this kind of metaphorically, and then we'll move out of that into the actual lived experience. Because how we talk about things like this, like depression, because It's another really powerful word that gets used in all kinds of interesting ways that may or may not be helpful, which is why I asked you about post-traumatic stress. It's another word, it's really powerful, and people use it all kinds of different ways to mean all kinds of different things. And no one really knows what it means, but everyone uses it. And the same thing with the pit. So the pit, the idea is the pit, that we're in the pit, and we got to get out of the pit. And that's a very, if I may say so, that's a very Christian view. And that's my background, so I'm not knocking it. We just want to name it for what it is. That, when you go down into the depths of hell, the idea is that you come back out again, and that you're better. So there's the picture, right? You were living your life, so you got crucified. You go down to the pit, and then you want to get out of the pit, and you move toward the light. So that's the image of, and that's even kind of very much the path of the sort of, classic path of grief that people talk about, right? Sadness, grief, shock, sorrow, despair, acceptance, adjustment, life, right? It's the same movement. So this is really classic. But the problem is, if that really is the model that we use, then it means something really awful about where we are. It means that we're in hell. It means that the pit is bad, and we need to get out of it. In fact, the pit has no value. The pit is like a negative experience. It's like integers, right? We want to be in the positive, and it's down below. We want success, and this is failure. So in every possible way, the pit comes to represent the bad and the unhelpful, right? And so what that means is, the first question that we start asking when we experience the pit is, how do I get out of here, right? And that's, we just, we start looking for books, and we start looking for people and professionals and anyone who will say, I've got the rope. Here, coming down, right? And it's, and people want that. People want someone to, right up here, just follow my voice. I've been through what you've been through. Come up here. Come this way. I'm coming down for you. Now I'm down here with you. We're heading up, attached here. So it's kind of this idea. But I really don't believe in that. I really don't believe that. I think that's one of the most problematic things about grief, is that as soon as we're in it, there's this prime cultural, spiritual, and I think it's also in us, this idea that it's not good to be there, that where you are, right? That when we're in a hopeless place, when we're in an empty place, when we're in a loveless, tear-filled place, that nothing good can come of that, and that we need to get out as fast as we can. As fast as we can, right? It's dangerous down there. And don't get me wrong, we can't live on mountaintops, and we can't live in the base of caves. Two places that human beings cannot live. We are definitely valley creatures, right? But we can stay down in these places a long time before we need to come out. My problem is, so to answer your question now, to move out of that kind of metaphoric into, an answer about how we live, is that I think one of our problems is that we think that we got to get out. That we see no value in it. We don't give any value to despair, to depression, to sadness, to emptiness, to hopelessness, to helplessness, to suicidal thoughts. Give no value to suicidal thought. You're never going to hear any psychiatrist say, that suicidal thought could really be helpful to you. And I mean that, and it's really sad, because suicidal thoughts are very, very common in people who are grieving. That sense that I would like this to end. Is there a way to end this? I don't want to go and slit my wrist. I just want this to stop. Right? I don't want to be here anymore for this. It's a very common thought, but no one will talk about that. I think that there is value in that place. I think it's of ultimate value, in fact. Ultimate. I actually give it more value than all your greatest beach days. When you're just like, those great days at the beach, when you're just like, yeah, like life is so good. Remember, most of you maybe are a long ways away from a really great beach day, but so the idea being, we don't question on a great day at the beach or the greatest day, the day of your child's birth, or whatever that day is, the day of your marriage, or whatever that day is, we don't question. On those days, we don't say, man, I might just be a little too happy today. This feeling that I'm having, I should question it. Maybe I should evaluate whether or not this is a worthy feeling, that this good feeling is worthy. We don't even do that. We wouldn't do that, of course not, because well, first of all, our culture doesn't invite us to question that, because it considers that to be where we're supposed to be. But when we are depressed and when we're sad and sorrowful, it injects us full of self-doubt. But there's no reason to. In fact, it is just as valid a place as a good and happy day. In fact, I think it's of more value. And I would like to pose to you what is the value of hopelessness, and what would be the value of ultimate despair? What would be its value as human beings? Because it's happening to us. I mean, it literally is happening to us. We can't deny that. It happens. So what's its value? It's either something that we just got to get the hell out of, or there's a value to it. What could be the value of being completely hopeless, completely despairing, completely emptied?
It's gotta get better.
Okay, that's still it's going to get better. We're still heading up. So I'm going to take that one off. Just want to take that one off for now. Just take away the idea that it's going to get better. What if it's not going to get better? What if we just take it, as you said earlier, what if we just stay in the present and don't think about that future place, that kind of messianic, he is risen moment, right? When we're made new, what's the value of this place?
You have to cope.
You have to cope. Okay, I like that.
Interesting to learn about yourself
To learn about yourself.
in that place.
Right.
Yet,
Keep coming.
Other people have walked in those shoes already. I
Right.
always find strength in that. Somebody's been here before. I'm not the first one to be here.
Yeah. Which is still, that's a beautiful thought, but it's also a strengthening thought, and I want to stay away from strengthening thoughts. I want to stay with weakening thoughts. I want to stay with the thoughts.
Freeing.
It's freeing. Go on. That's interesting. What's freeing about hopelessness? About ultimate, that moment of feeling?
You can let go, you don't have to control anymore.
Right. Right.
Stop fighting.
Which we shouldn't be doing. in the
Stop
first place.
fighting. Well, I mean, there's got to be some struggle in life. I don't want to make it too extreme, but I think that's right though. There is a moment, there is something that happens down there that is really profound, that has something to do with letting go, of getting free. There's another word.
Being at peace.
Surrender.
Surrender. That's a very good word. And if you surrender to something, I know it's a killer word, right? And no one wants to surrender in our world. I mean, that's losers surrender. Losers surrender. But once you surrender, what's next after surrender? If you surrender, what happens? Acceptance. Okay, so there's the word. That I think is the healing power of darkness, of being in these places, is to accept fully the human experience, to accept fully that moment of where you are, that something is gone forever. Something is gone forever, right? And if you can meet that place, it's desolation. But if you don't meet it, if you're just trying to push away from it, you never get to carry the true weight of death, the goneness of death, the endness, which is really the most profound human experience on earth. This is what the poets and the writers and all the religions are all talking about, is this moment. And it's the one that we want to run away from so quickly. I'm not saying that I'm not encouraging people to stay down there, because as I said, you can't stay in a cave forever, but we run so fast we don't get to benefit from it. We don't get to benefit from it. I encourage people to stay and to breathe and to relax and to surrender and to accept and to look around and have a look at yourself. I think that's where growth and wisdom comes from. I don't think it comes from anywhere else. In the smallest case, we know that you put your hand on the stove, you don't put your hand on the stove again. Pain, learning. It's the same thing, but this is the ultimate. This is the deepest one. So I encourage people to not hurry away and to not get anxious and to not let other people tell them that There's a lot of pressure from the medical community and other communities that tell you that if you get depressed, quote unquote, you're not doing yourself any favors. So I'm not here to tell you to get depressed or whatever. I'm just saying, and I want to talk about depression in a minute because I think it's one of the very big challenging aspects of grief. But I'd like to suggest that to accept and surrender, as opposed to try and figure a way out. You'll get out the same way you got in. You didn't have to work your way in. You don't have to work your way out. It's all natural. It's as natural as getting the flu. Your body will do what it needs to do. You will snot and get hot and shake and feel like shit and have bad breath and diarrhea. Right? No, I mean, it's the perfect metaphor. It's a human experience. It ain't pretty. But we know there's no way out of it. It's not like there's no way out of it. It's what we have to do. So do it. Just let it be. Don't worry about getting back up. You will go there on your own. It's a natural process. You will come out of your fever and you will heal. And you don't have to do anything. Let the process happen. That's not to say that we can't get help, but it's one thing to get help, and it's another thing to be trying to escape our sorrow. Such a different thing. I want my caregivers to actually hold my hand and leave me there. I'm with you here. And when you're ready to walk, then we'll step together. As opposed to be pulling you up.
And how do you get people to understand that, though?
Well, you have to start, don't even worry about other people understanding it. Understand it yourself.
Okay, so once you understand it yourself, how do you, for lack of a better example, how am I supposed to manage a family and maintain a family unit and a family relationship without it falling apart in that pit?
Well, this is I think where we move beyond sort of that in metaphor into the lived experience, that we can't just drop everything, right? Mm-hmm. So that you just have to manage that as best you can, and no one can tell you how to do that. I certainly wouldn't even begin to think about it. It's way too complex. But I think it's more important than that kind of management stuff you're good at. We already know you can do that. You've proven that. It ain't going to be pretty. It's not going to feel fun. But I think more importantly, if you can get the acceptance and the surrender part down, if you can really go, this is really what's happening to me, and it's okay. It's okay, and I'm a good and lovable person even while I'm in the middle of this horror right now. And I don't need to worry. What I do need to do is do what I can. Just do what you can. Like there's no, looking for, the people will come. If you identify them, then grab them. Just stay fluid. Like once you sort of surrender and accept a little bit, all that stuff just tends to be like, there is no optimum situation. There isn't. This is a subpar situation across the board. That's the whole point of the pit. Don't look for optimum situations anymore. Just kind of give that up a little bit. Just do the best you can and be okay with that. Like surrender control, surrender your need to fix, surrender your need to be the great person you want to be and to be that totally functional person. Surrender function. Surrender function. I dare you. I dare anyone. Well, good. Well, great.
But make it okay to do that. It's okay to wallow.
That's right. Yeah. It is okay to wallow.
Wallow for a bit.
So
I love to wallow.
I do too. I'm a great believer in it. I actually think that we don't do enough. We just don't do enough.
I have a question about wallowing.
Yeah.
And how do you know when you've done enough?
Again, I think it comes back to that kind of trust of your process. Like, how do we know that we've done enough fevering, that we've done enough fluing? Well, we start to feel better.
You get bored with it.
Or you don't want to.
Or you don't want to do it anymore.
And if you
Pajamas get dirty.
maybe you need to stay in longer. Maybe some people it's longer, right? Some people have a longer grief period than other people. Again, because there is no template. I want to say a little bit about depression, to sort of because there's a lot of I hear so often that I'm afraid of being depressed, and doctors put people on antidepressants really quickly, and I think people need to go to their doctors and they need to get clarification about what's going on for them. But of course, we are a depression obsessed society. We're a sadness avoidant society. As a result, we have created a business of depression, where people 50 years ago we didn't even have this kind of awareness of it, and a part of that's good, but a part of that is problematic. And certainly with grief, there's been a really problematic crossover where everyone who starts to feel sad starts to think I don't want to get depressed, and the depression word comes up. So what I'd just like to say to you is the one of the ways of knowing, and even this I think is tricky, because I actually think that depression again is kind of a healthy thing. I really do. I think it's another God-given, it's bodily, you need to do it. And I can tell you why in a minute, but I will say that sorrow is a little bit different than depression. Sorrow tends to have spikes. You'll have a good day, you'll have a good moment, you'll have a good week, you might have a good hour. You go out with the girls, or you do something, you're in the wood shop or whatever, and you have a moment where you actually feel alive again. Depressed people don't have that. It don't happen. When you're depressed, there's no spikes, right? So that's the clinical understanding of depression versus sorrow, which can have spikes, which can have good days when you can see your grandkids and feel like, oh, right? People who are depressed, they see their grandkids and they feel like they're remote from them. They feel like they can't. Okay, so that's the clinical. Now, depression has been defined as a psychiatric disorder, which is a byproduct of a sick brain. So if we do get depressed, if we do actually find ourselves in the middle of a grief of someone that we really, really love, 36 years, 50 years of love, and then a woman or a husband loses their wife and has a year of total despondency, and they put them on antidepressants because this is an illness. It doesn't make any sense. Right? It doesn't make any sense to me. Depression, or whatever we call depression, or that despondency, that really deep down crushing of our souls, is normal. And I think that and again, because we're so afraid of the via negativa, we're so afraid of the dark places, that we've lost our ability as people to navigate our way in the darkness. We've lost our night vision. So one of the things I really encourage people, and again, I think that there are people who are chronically depressed, and I think who have long-term issues with, and I think those people need help, and I'm not against taking antidepressants, so I don't want anyone to hear this wrong. What I would like to suggest is reflect a little bit on sadness, and on the place that we've given it, and how we've relegated it to a disease, how we've relegated despondency to a disease, to a brain problem, as opposed to a heart. A living heart, that's a sign of an alive heart. If you loved hard enough to be that despondent, you had a living heart. I'm sorry. But we don't like seeing the other side of things. We don't like seeing the cost of our love. And it really makes me sad. This is one of my greatest sadnesses, is that I think we're lost a little bit as a people in the West. I think we're far away from our sadness. I don't think we know how to be sad anymore. I think we've forgotten how to let each other be sad. I am a sad person. I have lots of sadness in my life. I have lots of things I feel crappy about. I have lots of days when I feel like my heart is dead. And other days I feel so alive. I just feel so alive. Why can't, and I find that if I allow both of those things to be, that I get this nice, it's like everything. It breathes in and out. And if I trust that breathing, then it's okay. Then all of a sudden I can go deeper into my sadness and come out further into my love. And I think that's a healthy thing to learn how to do. And as a therapist, I've tried to practice that, to actually allow myself to be sad and to be despondent and to feel my losses. And I encourage you to do the same. To be more pioneering in your sadness. And educate those around you to be more pioneering in theirs. You need to go and reflect for yourself, use your own mind and your own heart, and do your own reading. This is what I think about it. This is what I think about what's happened, and certainly what I see. The last thing I want to say just about anxiety and depression is I'd like just to tell you a little bit about where I think depression comes from and how it works. And then, how are we doing for time?
Yeah, 8:30.
Okay. So the last little thing I want to say about depression, then we'll move on into other things, is that the way I understand depression, this comes from years of working in the mental health field, is I think our natural starting place is anxiety. I think human beings, like birds, are anxious. We're anxious beings. I just think that's our self-protective, natural, God-given, startle response. It's like we look, and that's why we made it. That's why we did so well, because we have really good anxiety. We got really good anxiety. We know how to watch for problems, and we stop problems from. So we've managed to make ourselves incredibly resistant to death. And we've done very well as a species because of our anxiety. So anxiety is not a bad thing. Of course, it can get out of control, and we know what happens when it does. It can be really, really uncomfortable and unhelpful, right? But that's part of the human experience too. That's kind of that kind of goes along with depression. I mean, this is part of the human experience, is anxiety is with us. And grief has lots of anxiety in it. Loss has lots of anxiety in it. And I actually like to suggest to you that, in a way, there's equal amounts of anxiety to sadness. We tend to make a little bit more room for the anxiety stuff. Like, we'll actually this anxiety sucks, but that sadness really doesn't. Like, we'll not live with the sadness, but I can sort of handle the anxiety. But interestingly enough, this is how I think anxiety and depression are interconnected. When we get really, really anxious, there comes a point in our physiology, because don't forget that all these feelings, like sadness and anxiety, these are bodily experiences. These are not thoughts. These are feelings. They're literally, you'll feel them in your body. Would folks say that their grief is in their body as opposed to... Do folks experience their grief as sort of something that's embodied as opposed to a thought? Okay, because I think that's really important, that grief is in our body. And anxiety, because it's in our body too. When we're very anxious or we're having sustained anxiety over a period in grief, at a certain point, the nervous system, our physiological nervous system, it can't take it. There's only so much we can take. It's like anything. It fatigues. And what it does is it caps it. And that's what depression is. It caps the anxiety. It literally says, okay, that's harmful. So it tends to cap it. And how it does that capping is it creates low affect, flat low affect over sustained periods. Because anxiety over sustained periods causes death, heart, liver, all kinds of stuff. Depression, much less lethal. So this idea, depression, people who experience depression, usually when I'm counseling people in my office, people who come in depressed, I usually encourage them, I actually try and tease out their anxiety. Because if you can get a person feeling their anxiety again, they don't have to cap, and the mood comes up, but then they're incredibly anxious, like incredibly uncomfortably anxious. But they're not depressed anymore. So that's a really good thing. So I always tell people when they're feeling anxious that things are really good. Like, they're really, really good. Because you haven't had to cap that with that really mood-altering and mood-flattening, you haven't gone into that sort of second level. And it's really, really hard place to be. But it's also a natural thing. So the other thing is, it's also natural. That's your body's natural way of taking care of itself. So give it some credit. Give it some credit. Like, just imagine if we started to actually say thanks for our depressions as opposed to, I know it sucks, but I mean, it's dealing with anxiety. So anyways, I just wanted to offer that as a way of thinking differently about both anxiety and depression, which have such negative connotations, when it's actually the body's trying to heal. It's trying to deal. They're not healthy states. They're very uncomfortable states. Okay? They're like having open wounds. Uncomfortable states, but natural. So we don't have to think of yourself as being like, diseased or, I just think there's other ways of thinking about it. Any other questions or thoughts? Just or reflections, refutations, What did you think about that whole idea of being able to give ourselves permission to be in our sorrow, as opposed to kick for the surface all the time?
No, it really resonates with me. I certainly feel very similar to because I'm a caretaker and have been. I was a social worker for many years, so I even chose a profession where I could caretake for a living. And it's very difficult for me to talk about how I'm feeling, if it's negative in any way. So it's very wonderful to hear you say that. It's very, I don't know, it just, although I know it intellectually, it's just so good to hear the words. So I'm going to do more of it. I am. It makes me feel like, all right, you got permission. Go there again. I've been going there more.
Yeah.
And feeling better because I have been. But it's, you know, it's a new thing for me. So, you know, maybe I'll be a little more gentler with myself in terms of the amount of time that I'm there.
Yeah. Nice. Interesting how the body speaks. You know, the body speaks.
So
we
you know about
hate
this
it.
rash thing?
Yeah, right. Not my specialty, but I will tell you that I've heard it all. Like,
Rash?
no, everything. Like you have rashes and headaches and tunnel vision and heart palpitations.
That's anxiety?
And it's all. I'm certain of it. I mean, because before death, before diagnosis, healthy life, good sleep, you know, or generally, and then diagnosis and all of this stuff starts happening. Irritable bowel, right? Neck issues, rashes, diagnosis of diseases, lupus, like all these like immuno things like fibromyalgia, and, like literally the toll that grief takes on us. And again, like my major concern is that we expend so much energy in resistance to grief, that our energy that could be going into our healing, because you know death is natural too. You know, and unfortunately, this kind of maybe the last thing we can talk about before we're done is like this idea of kind of victimization by death, which is pretty much the way we think about death now. That if death happens, that we're victims of it, as opposed to it being part of the natural, movement of life. Not to say that we don't grieve it and that we don't feel despondent, but it's completely natural. And the struggle and the bodily struggle that you see when we watch people die, the way their bodies struggle in death, is hard work. Not just for us who's watching, it's literally hard work for the person who's dying. It's their last piece of human work. And it's very incredibly hard. And I don't think it happens to them any more than your grief happens to you when we have, I mean, it literally, you can't tell me the person who's dying isn't letting go. They're letting go. And it's a ripping. And it's hard work. And I wish we could see that struggle with eyes that could see that being their perfect work, the perfect and final work of their life, as opposed to a traumatic image seared upon the backdrop of our happy lives. I think that does us a disservice, and it misses them. It misses their work.
Much grief as they do.
But those are. I wonder what would happen for you if you could embrace those images. There's a couple of reasons why those images happen to us. They're the only way that we learn that death has happened. That's our body and our mind teaching us that that person is dead. Literally, if we didn't have those images, you wouldn't learn, right? Be like my friend Ben in Ottawa, right? That's one way of going about it. I'm not sure that's the healthiest way to deal with it. It literally, you're being taught, your soul is teaching you something really important. And I wonder, and it sounds like it's really working hard to teach you. So it could be that there's a real tug of war going on inside you.
Because I don't want to forget them. I
Right.
don't want to forget those images.
Right.
I don't want to forget that moment.
Yeah. I wonder if you could see that face. I wonder if you could see that face, but not see it as trauma, but as really the last beautiful work, of those beloved people. and that you had a privilege to see it, and that it didn't have to be a nightmare, but rather something that you could literally hold up. But also recognize that that's one nostril, is that you can hold it. The other nostril is that every time you see it, it does teach you that you have to remove a bit. You can't see that and you can't draw closer to that. It just is, right? So this is how we're taught. This is why smells and certain things that we see are a bit repulsive to us and are a bit scary to us, because that's natural. So again, that doesn't have to be a trauma. This is a natural repulsion a bit that we feel when something that we loved changes shape, changes form, and dies. My next door neighbor's dad died last Monday, and he knows I'm a bereavement counselor, and he came out. I was getting on my motorcycle to go to work the next day, and he literally came out. He was like, he looked like shit, and he said, wait, man, I want to talk to you. And so I said, yeah, what's going on? I knew his dad had died. He said, I want to talk to you. When my dad died, I think it's like some blood or something came out of his mouth, and I can't stop thinking about that. And I don't know what that is. And so I asked him a few questions, and I think it was bile coming up probably from his stomach, you know. And that was really helpful to him to understand both the physics of it in a way, like what that might be. He thought it might be blood, but also we had this conversation about the work that his dad did and the fact that the body works hard at death, and that's really something to be proud of. Right? We can be proud of, even though it's so difficult. So I know that's kind of like a hard pill to swallow, talking about that stuff. But I think it's a helpful reframing of the end, of death, that we can both recognize that those images are beautiful, and we can hold them as surely and as truly as we should be able to hold those happy beach days and those other images. That's also life, right? But also understand that the power and the scariness sometimes of those images are what we actually need to become remote from in order to heal. They're pushing us away, like all the other thoughts that we have that sort of teach us that the person is dead. So it's a really healthy and normal aspect of grief. But I'm like not the helpful therapist, am I?